Thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate that this one was slightly different scheduling to what we normally do, but we had Graeme and Anne message us to say that they were going to be stopping into lovely Albany as part of their Great Australian Bookshop Tour, and we knew that we just couldn't miss out on that opportunity to have them here. So thank you.
Thank you.
So before we get started though, I just want to do the acknowledgement of country. We are so lucky to be gathered here today, and I've got my words here to make sure I don't get mixed up, so I'm sorry if I'm not looking at you as I say this. I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, this space where we are meeting this evening. The Menang people have been here on this Noongar Budja for thousands of years. The connection they share with this place we call the Great Southern runs generations deep. It is with respect that I acknowledge the Menang people and their elders, past, present and emerging. It is a privilege to be here, to live here and to learn here. Thank you all for coming this evening. Alrighty. Anne, Graeme, thank you for coming. How have you gone so far on your grand tour? I'd love to hear a bit more of that, and I know the audience will probably be going, what big Great Australian Bookshop Tour?
Yeah, good.
Good, they better be curious.
Anne keeps the score, but I looked at it today, and this is bookshop number
200.
Exactly 200 bookshops so far. We think there are around 450 bookshops in Australia that would sell a copy of the Glass House. That was the criterion. So we weren't going to religious or art or even second-hand bookshops particularly, but we wanted to go to every bookshop in Australia that might sell a copy of the Glass House. And let me anticipate your next question. Why? and
Gosh, you've done this before, haven't you?
Well, I did it about 15 minutes ago to the table over there, so they're going to say, oh, God, here he goes again, it's the same old story, but it is. Essentially, there were about three reasons we wanted to do this. The first one was because the Rosie Project, which was published about 11 years ago, became a very, very successful book, one of the most successful novels in Australian history, really. But it was down to the independent, small bricks and mortar bookshops like Paperbark, which actually recommended this book, hand sold it, as it were, because it was an unusual book and it needed that, and we wanted to say thank you. The second reason was because we thought that the Glass House needed the same help, that this is an unusual book, both in structure and in the sort of dangerous territory of mental health that it ventures into, and we felt that this was another book that we would be asking independent booksellers to, people who read the books and recommended books. Look, we had faith that if they read it, they would want to recommend it. But obviously they're not going to recommend it, they're not going to be bribes, they're not going to recommend it if they don't love it. But we felt this was a book we wanted to put in front of them on that basis. And the third reason, I think, is that we saw independent and bricks and mortar bookshops as part of the book ecosystem. And we wanted them to continue. Yes, there is a place for the online booksellers, there is a place for ebooks, but there's also a place for touch and feel books. And we felt we wanted that to continue, and if we could do anything to support them, that would be great. But there's been another thing, that on the journey, as we've visited these 200 bookshops and done a lot of events around them as well, we've come to realise just how important bookshops are, not just as part of the book ecosystem, but as part of the community. Because bookshops and books are a starting point for discussions that people might not have otherwise. We were out in the Nullarbor the other day, and there's a sign on the wall that says, the effect, mental health, talk about it, or words to that effect. But you know what? Reading that on the wall isn't going to actually make you say, hey, mate, about time we talked about mental health. But you know what? Reading a book is where people say, yeah, I tell you what, I read a weird thing in the book. It reminded me so much of my brother. And I've had those conversations already tonight, and I'm sure Anne has. And look, let me just flag. We're collecting some of those conversations. We have our documentary maker, Ben, with us tonight. And if any of you at the end of the night want to just talk a little bit about how the book might have played into that, we're just trying to share that with people and say this is part of getting that conversation going. So just come grab us.
Thank you so much. And how have you been finding the journey so far? Any car hiccups? Any really funny stories that we need to hear?
Hey, I've got to say,
I knew there was going to be.
They're going to shut him up now.
Because I'm the book tour guy and Anne's the book guy. but Ben says the bumper bar fell off. We had this third-party bumper bar, piece of garbage, I can tell you. Yeah? And we should have just stayed with a Toyota original, blah, blah. Just remember that. And it came off, and we are like, oh, man, this is terrible. And Ben's saying, that's what we need, drama.
You've got to have something happen.
Go on, this next question is for you, Anne.
And I would love to hear a little bit about your history, how you came to be writers, what were you like when you were young, what was your relationship to reading?
I think I should take this one.
Okay.
No, you should not.
And really, really quickly before I forget, for any newcomers, there will be spoilers. Just so you're prepared.
Not in this answer, there's not going to be. So I am an absolutely avid reader. Like there's a big pile in the back of the car, kind of accumulating as I get through them.
As you sell these ones, then
there's the box of these as well. But no, the ones I'm reading, and including the one that's set along the Ningaloo, kind of the West Australian coast at the moment, with Anna Downs' latest one, Red River something or other. That's you don't want to be doing that drive and reading it, I don't think, but I've done it before. So from about the age of 8, I decided I was going to be a writer. Graham, back as a kid, was an avid reader, but probably less so as an adult, and I've continued it. And I mean, poor Graham mostly reads what he's sent to do an endorsement. That's the word I was looking for. Whereas I don't get asked to do so many of those, and just read faster. So, but I've always wanted to be a writer. I had a book out at the last phase, to Random House at the last kind of hurdle. They'd kind of been very positive, and I have to say I read the final rejection letter, and I went, wow, that wasn't a rejection letter. It was like, I can't believe I took it as a rejection. But at the same time that came in, Beyond Blue gave me $4 million to run, not me personally, but to run the Beyond Blue postnatal depression program. So I spent the next 10 or 12 years as an academic, working ridiculous hours and, burning the candle at both ends and all those kind of things. And then we did the Camino. We walked the Camino. We actually had a year off. I did a sabbatical in New York. We lived in New York. I was at Yale University. And the person we stayed with for a while until we moved to New York that I was working with worked so ridiculously hard. She was up at 5:30 in the morning on the stepper reading papers. Her husband, interventionist cardiologist, was downstairs on the rower reading things. Really ridiculous hours. And I'm thinking, I don't want to do this anymore. So the Camino, I had this literary epiphany, which was, let's go part-time and go back to writing. So, and Graham was studying screenwriting, having sold his business at that stage, and we kind of came to it together. While we were walking the Camino, this 19-year-old Belgian boy said to us, when he heard about we were interested in writing, you will write a book together. We're thinking, you don't write books together. And it will be a love story. And we're thinking, we don't write love stories. And it will be about old people like you. And we kind of via that came to our separate writing, kind of, and then together as well.
Sounds like a sweetie. He was thinking you needed to write a memoir.
Well, what Anne didn't mention was he said we should set it on the Camino de Santiago, and which is what we ended up doing.
Yeah, and 2 steps forward, and then 2 steps onward, the sequel, we went to Rome, and we walked that walk as well.
Talk about doing your research.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what about yourself, Graham? What was your history with reading and how it translated?
Well, I did read as an adult.
As a kid.
but probably less so in recent years. And in fact, the mark where I stopped reading so much was when I enrolled in a screenwriting program. So long story short, I enrolled in a screenwriting program at 50 after I'd sold my business. I hadn't written any fiction essentially since I was at high school, but I'd written technical stuff and so on, so I knew how to put words together and so on. And I had a screenplay called The Rosie Project, which wasn't going anywhere, so I rewrote it as a novel, and that did go somewhere, and that was it, yeah.
And what about with your relationship to reading? I know that you do a lot of reading for work. Any favourite authors or that sort of thing? Genres?
Not genres, okay, so that's easy, because I there was a time in my life where I did read genre fiction. I read all the Robert Ludlum stuff and all that sort of stuff. I'm going back to my 20s now. I read, I guess, what you call contemporary fiction, which is what I write, and what we write. Well, Anne will write more genre stuff. She'd write the crime stuff earlier, but I would say I write contemporary fiction, and I read a lot in that space. And you know what? There are books that are right for the time of life. If people say, what's the most important book you ever read? I'd say probably The Plague by Albert Camus, but I was 15. I was 15 when I read that. It was life, informing and changing, and it taught me that you could write about really deep and important topics and still be a ripping good yarn, that you didn't have to feel heavy to be profound. And that's a mistake that I think is a misperception that is very, very common, that if a book is going to be important or profound, it must be hard to read. And I don't think that's true. But you're not going to win too many literary prizes if you're light.
Very true, though, that a lot of that heavy sort of philosophical stuff is meant to be a bit of academic snobbery. It's not meant to be for everyone, which is so disappointing because a lot of it is so engaging. It's just got a bad rap. And what about yourself, Anne?
And because I read a lot, I read a lot in all directions. So the most common is the crime thriller, and Michael Robotham is right up there because even though he's not a psychologist, he has a fantastic psychologist hero, and his more recent ones explore some really interesting psychological kind of concepts in his characters. And he's also a really nice guy. So
that always helps.
And the Taina French early, the Dublin murder, Taina French was great. Don't like her current stuff. But I also read like Paul Murray's The Bee Sting, and when I see him at whichever writers' festival he's at with me, I think it's Sydney, I'll just glare at him a lot because I don't like the ending.
It was left very open, wasn't it?
I don't like... Well... But I'm always going to remember it. I mean, there's... And that's the kind of the choice you make. It's not as comfortable. But boy, am I always going to remember that book. And one day, you did know what happened in David Nichols, and he's a lovely guy too. And I will never forgive him for that ending either. So
I've actually never read any David Nichols, I have to admit.
It was a very good book, but I hated the ending. But I haven't forgotten it.
So what about with this road trip? Do we have any karaoke happening? Do we have some playlists that are absolutely blasting some belters, audiobooks? What's the sound?
Well, Anne sings.
Excellent.
And she's actually okay.
Yeah.
And I occasionally sing and I'm not, so that's the vibe in the car. But it's a bit of a nostalgia trip for me. I first did a journey around Australia in 1978 with a buddy. In a 1962 combi van, which was not as old as the car we're travelling in now for that time. I mean, we were in a 1999 Toyota Prado at the moment with no bumper bar. And I can tell you, when we went around Australia, my buddy and I, we had 3 cassettes. We just played them all the time. So and 2 of them were Jackson Browne. so every time I hear a Jackson Browne song, I know all the words, and it just brings back all the memories. We were in Albany when the whaling station was still here, and we stood here and watched a whale being cut up. I remember that.
But we're also talking about the edits of the sequel to The Glass House. So it will be out sometime next year, but it's back with us, and we're talking about how to fix some of the things that we're being kind of told to fix.
Okay. And how have you been finding that? I mean, obviously you've been doing it for a while now, but that process of writing together collaboratively. A lot of the authors that we've spoken to, they've said that writing a book is not a solo journey anyway, because you do have your editors and even your marketing team, all of it working together. does it feel the same as when you've written books individually, or is the process quite different?
Remarkably similar, because we always plan together, but when we're doing an actual book, we're writing together, we plan a lot more depth together. And it depends which book, because Two Steps Forward, we took on different characters and had alternating chapters, flaky Californian divorce, widow versus the bitter British divorcee, and the alternating chapters kind of made it much easier to at least do the first draft. Whereas this is my world. So the glass house is, set in an acute psychiatry ward. So this is my world, and having planned it, with the exception of a chapter or two, I did the entire first draft, and I did it very quickly. And I was a 27-year-old psychiatry trainee like Hannah Wright once upon a time. So it was easy to inhabit that. But then it's taken 29 complete passes for both of us to turn Hannah into not me. And we've millennialised her, and she has a very different background from me.
Put the commas in.
And then, yes, Graham's grammar and structure, there's a few things Graham's added. It's definitely was a book that we needed to do together. We bring very different strengths, and it's been a different process to the others from point of view of the how we wrote the first draft. But other than that, it's been very similar.
Look, it's like this. If I say to you, I was in Barcelona and someone stole my wallet, you say, oh, gee, that's interesting, Graham. But if I'm the detective from Barcelona and I say, Graham, what actually happened? Let me guess. There was a guy distracted you by talking about and then there was, oh, wow, that's exactly how it happened. That's amazing. Well, the way we catch these guys is we've got and suddenly you know the context of what's happened, how the trick is done, what goes on in the background, what they're doing about it, all that. So the thing with Anne, her contribution to the book is, the idea from the book really came because Anne's been coming home for 40 years with amazing stories about mental health. You know what? In this room, I would guess almost everybody has an interesting story about mental health. But they're like, I lost my wallet in Barcelona. They don't have necessarily, unless you're a professional in the field or whatever, they don't have that depth and understanding of what goes on behind it. So I would come home with the story and Anne would say, but blah, 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 blah. And that was what I could see being a book, that insider's knowledge on top of the amazing stuff that happens that we all know about would give us a book that had some great stories that we could relate to and might give us a bit more insight into stuff that might have happened with our own family and colleagues and perhaps ourselves.
And when you were writing, so were you you're part-time, working part-time at that point when you were writing The Glass House, or?
Yeah, so I'm now only, I was probably doing 2 days a week at the time. I'm probably down
Felt
to 1
like
day
4.
a week now. Yeah, well, it was
Keeping the material fresh.
I mean, I kind of do up and down. I mean, the fact that, my main work over the last 35 years has been perinatal psychiatry. But that said, you have women with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder having babies, so it still exposed me to a lot. But I also do on-call, or I did until very recently when I decided, no, I'm over it. But the on-call stuff just gave me so much exposure to the real stuff, and I supervise registrars. So the nuts and bolts of kind of everything that's happening, and I'm on multiple emails, and I'm constantly in contact with the medical director for varying reasons. And so the many levels of working in the public mental health system, and I'm sure there are some differences between Western Australia and Victoria, but less than you'd think. I bet it's all the same. We don't have enough staff, it's under-resourced. The staff are being assaulted at higher rates than ever before. The burnout is high. So all of that kind of just makes the background. And it was not like I was thinking about that when I wrote it, but it came out because that's the world I work in.
And so you were writing Glass House as you were still working actively in that field kind of thing.
Yeah, and I still am. So when I go back, we finish in July 23rd is technically the last day, and then the person who's running the mother-baby unit in Melbourne will go on leave, and I'll go and run the unit for a while. So I'm still pretty much hands-on intermittently.
Okay. Well, in that sort of scenario then, how did that inform your writing process? Did you have any sort of rituals, or were you just doing it whenever you could?
For the first draft, I must have had a couple of weeks off because I just fever dream, vomit draft. These kind of things come to mind, and then.
Yeah, look, people ask, do you have writing rituals and so forth? I've got a book out there called The Novel Project about writing and how to write. And it basically says there's 3 stages, 3 broad stages to writing a novel. You plan it, you write a draft, you edit and improve it. And people, when they say, well, have you got writing rituals, they're generally thinking that you're just spending all your time writing that draft. The writing rituals, the writing behaviour are quite different for planning, which we do driving around in the car, do over a drink, all those sorts of things, and over intense sessions and arguments sometimes, but it's different. The draft, where each of us, when we do it, we try to be really focused, and that is very ritualistic. But as Anne said, she wrote the draft for The Glass House in about 2 weeks, okay? And then 18 months of editing, okay? Because, as I say in the book, if you skimp on one stage, you pay for it in the next. I'll tell you the story. Yeah, stop. quick story. So Anne said that she did all but a couple of chapters. Okay, so she just was writing 8,000 words a day. She was just writing a whole chapter. Vroom. Each day a chapter. Vroom, 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 vroom. And I did a chapter and a half or so in the process because there's a chapter with an autistic person, and that's sort of my space. Blah blah blah. But she got to 12 chapters, and the 13th is really about relationships and stuff that falls out. It doesn't need a lot of medical knowledge. I said, let me at this. Not being a competitive type or anything like that, but I said, let me have a go at this. So I got up about 6 o'clock in the morning. I drank a couple of double espressos, and I went at it. Flat out, all day, only stopping for essential bodily functions, you know, meaning coffee. Hammered through it. Must have been 8 o'clock at night. I said, done! There you go. Cop that, Anne. Passed it over to her, and she looked and said, it's only 3,000 words, Graeme. So I dipped my lid.
And you didn't want to repeat that experience the next day?
No, I did not.
But your heart didn't either.
It gradually grew in the way that writing should grow to a normal size.
So you're a sprinter. Now,
Cocaine, I would have said.
Just Coca-Cola, actually. Yeah.
I don't even like that.
Tempranillo.
Yeah. But not till the end of the day.
Yes, yeah, that's your reward. Yeah. Now, digging into the novel itself, it's a small thing, but I love hearing about how people choose their epigraphs. I always love seeing where that came from and trying to look into it more and seeing if it's something that I need to investigate as well, if it's inspired the author. So you had a quote from K. Redfield Jameson, An Unquiet Mind?
And that definitely came from me, because there's a million mental health...
Fibber!
No, I found it, but you picked it. You know, all right, it was a joy.
How about I found it online and said, who's this person? You said, come on. No, okay. Here's the truth. It's a compromise anyway. It's you said K. Redfield Jamison is fantastic. She has lots of stuff. So I Googled K. Redfield Jamison and said, how about this one? And you said yes. Go on.
All right, I'm prepared to accept that. But I came up with K first.
This is how we write together, see?
An
This is how we live together.
amazing woman. I've never met her in person, which I hope maybe one day I will. She's a professor, technically a professor of psychiatry, but she's actually a psychologist. But she's, was so amazing. They put her in charge of the Department of Psychology and Psychiatry. I can't imagine the dynamics because psychiatrists tend to be a bit about psychologists.
That's one
Our
less book
son
we sold
is a
tonight.
psychologist, and I don't have. And one of the really kind of the best scenes has a psychologist in this. The family therapy scene has a psychologist in it, so I don't have a problem with psychologists at all. But she also has bipolar disorder, and my heroine in my crime thrillers is a forensic psychiatrist with bipolar disorder, and in part Kay inspired that. And her memoir was was beautifully written. She's done very well, but the standout line, and I can't actually remember what the actual line is.
We all
No,
move.
I don't mean I don't mean that one. The line that I remember from it was how having bipolar disorder robbed her of having a partner and family, and it was just because she had to pick essentially between profession and that. And look, it wasn't even that. It's just the bipolar just stuffed up her relationships so much that by the time she got it under control, it was kind of too late. And in the background of my crime thrillers with Natalie King there's 4 of them, and by the final one, she's in a mother-baby unit with her baby, and she's kind of worked out she actually has to take her medication, and she cannot afford to get unwell.
Can I just speak to the quote, though, which is, we all move uneasily within our restraints. And I liked it because it applies both to the patients in this story and to the mental health workers, all of whom are working within restraints and constraints and trying to do their best. All trying as hard as they can to do their best under difficult circumstances. And that's... the book is a bit special because it tells the story from a mental health workers' point of view. Very unusual. In fiction and in memoir, typically the mental health workers are other, because we typically tell it from the point of view of the patient. And we've got this model of Nurse Ratched, if you like, that of the evil mental health worker, or at least in the memoir writer, reasonably enough, the people who are often in their way. There might be one heroic mental health worker, but most of them are not. And we've tried to strike a balance between the two, of people working under difficult circumstances doing their best. But we just found there's very little else in this space. We are selling, we know, a lot of these books to mental health workers who say, at last, a book that represents us in a sympathetic way.
And I really appreciated how, you had such a diverse group of characters and they all felt genuine and nuanced. No one was perfect. Everyone made mistakes. I really appreciated that you showed that level of humanity as well in both in the patients and the workers.
I take credit for introducing humanity to the manager. Anne just wanted to make her evil. She like the evil managers, they're always in our way. And I understand, because people who stop you from doing exactly the way you would like to do it, you demonise. But because I used to be a management consultant, I knew that some of these people were pretty evil people, but an awful lot of them are just trying to do the best they can. That they're in part of the system as well. And I wanted to humanise Nicole, who's our representative of management there.
She's not a devil making everyone do hand hygiene modules.
Yes, she is. Oh my God. And I'm getting management emails constantly. Why haven't you done your 5 modules? Because your IT can't get me online.
And why doesn't IT have any money? Because the clinicians said, don't give any more money to admin, give it all to us. It's complicated.
Would you say this is very informed by your real experience?
Totally.
It might be.
Look, at the end of the day, it's an authentic book. And we worked very, very hard for authenticity, because if I was asked, if I was going to write a book about mental health, as a person who is ignorant in that field, less so now, I would be bound rightly by guidelines for writers on writing about mental health, which is basically be safe, don't do dangerous things like associate mental health issues with violence. Absolutely not. The book opens with a woman pulling out a knife as she's suffering a psychotic episode. This would be an absolute no-no for me to write. But unfortunately, we know our son works in the prison system. An awful lot of people are incarcerated because they actually have mental health problems. So you've got to... It's a complicated business, and if you don't understand it, you make poor decisions. And we said we'll go the other way, because Anne has the knowledge. We can do this thing absolutely authentically. But we were so concerned to make sure we were authentic. We ran, this was at my instigation, because Anne felt she knew it pretty well. She was right. But I said, I want to run every chapter past a specialist in that particular field, and they basically came back and said, "Oh, man's pretty much got it right, except for a tiny thing here or whatever." But they're now on our side, which is nice. And we also ran it past people with lived experience, people who had been in mental health facilities, who and we got fantastic feedback actually from them to make sure that as well as we could, that we represented their side of it as well.
That was going to be one of my questions actually, because I read at the back with the first reader groups. How did you go about approaching that? Was it initially through the publisher, or was it around colleagues, or?
It was totally from us before the publisher, and the clinicians were easy because I've got, okay, who do I know that's an expert in bipolar? Who do I know that's blah, 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 blah? And even with the postpartum psychosis, which is my area of expertise, we gave it to Anne Williams in Adelaide. She actually got the whole book because the postpartum psychosis woman is one we follow throughout. So there are 3 cases we follow through the whole book. So she read the whole book. But the lived experience came... So we had an Indigenous sensitivity reader because one of the doctors is Indigenous. So that came from me. But the other ones largely came from you.
Yeah. Because we have a non-binary autistic character. And we got the fabulous Yen Perkis, who is non-binary, autistic, a mental health activist, has schizophrenia, and has done jail time. So they are a great person. They interviewed us in Adelaide. They're just a person who's triumphed over enormous odds and so on. It's just a really great person, and has been a great supporter of the Rosie books, and said, we're going to call on you again. And in fact, asked our publisher, we said, we want them to be paid, obviously. So they did that. Plus a bunch of people who simply were prepared to read it, who had lived experience, some of whom wanted to be acknowledged, some of whom understandably didn't want to have their names put on the page. But we got powerful feedback from them around the title, around all sorts of things. And so far, since it's been published, we changed publishers in this. And a lot of publishers that we then approached were, I'll use the word frightened, because one of our publishers said, our original publisher, almost the parting words were, "You've written a brave novel." And they didn't want to go, I won't say about them, did not want to go into that mental health space because it was dangerous. They didn't want to go into mental health space with people who hadn't followed the guidelines, even if they had 40 years of experience. They didn't want to go in there because it was seen as inappropriate to write from the point of view of anybody except the person with a lived experience. And Hachette, who became very enthusiastic about it, said, but Anne's got lived experience as a mental health worker. And those people live legitimate and important lives too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But now we know why there aren't many books in that space.
Yeah, they kind of get stomped down, don't they? Yeah. Well, good to know that Hachette is a publisher who's brave enough to...
They've been incredibly supportive. It's been
It's
wonderful.
Rebecca Saunders. Yeah. I don't know that. I don't know that Hachette
fantastic.
is. I'm going to be really blunt, but I think this comes down to individuals. And Rebecca Saunders has been a brilliant advocate for our book, and that's great. Yeah. Just as Tex were brilliant advocates for the Rosie Project.
Yeah, different publishing houses have different specialties, don't they? Different strengths. Yeah. So, just briefly with there as well, you talked about some of your characters. Bit of a simple question, but do you have a favourite? Do you each have a different character that felt maybe like there was a bit more of you in that character, or someone who you just... Because I loved John.
John's the Indigenous character.
Yeah, I thought he was lovely. And I quite liked Elena. I found that...
Elena's the psychologist that does the fairly out there family therapy, which really happened. No vanilla slices in the real episode. Yeah, and...
So who's your favourite character?
So the favourite character...
Get out of that rabbit hole.
Well,
I know the answer to this. Come on,
yeah,
stop pretending to think.
Like she's not really.
Yeah, stop pretending to think about it.
No, because I'm actually
Hannah.
reconsidering it. Well, that's right, because I really think I should say Hannah. And I'm going to say Hannah this time because Hannah does have, obviously, 30% of me or something, 25% of me there. He thought I was going to say Sandra Bird, who's the professor that dresses like a Rosella of the mother-baby unit. And, of course, yeah, there is a little bit of a resemblance because I'm not represented tonight, but I have been known to be a bit outrageous with my costume.
But the tutu in some of the promotional pictures?
Was there a tutu?
Yeah, there was in one of them. I'm sure there was. Was there a tutu?
Oh my God! Nah, never happened.
Were you wearing that, Graham?
It was her.
You were a duck. Yeah. But no, look, Hannah ultimately, and you know, when we turned to millennial, I kind of went, oh my God, you're the registrar from hell. You kind of, as a consultant, you'd give me a lot of grief. But I actually kind of like registrars that give me a bit of grief because it keeps you on the, it keeps you on the toes. And whilst there's a lot about millennials that I possibly disagree with their attitudes, but Hannah's got a lot going for her, and and her background is wonderful. I love her background, and it came from the brother of a girlfriend he had the family, or basically the brother of a girlfriend he had back when he was 17. So that was kind of a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I've got the easy answer for me is Carrie, who is the autistic character. I don't identify as autistic, but I feel I'm really enmeshed in that community now, and I just really wanted to have a character like that. It was a more sophisticated version in some ways of Don Tillman. But, I don't want to have any evil characters in any book that has my name on it. People don't get up in the morning and twirl their moustache and say, today I do evil. They do what they think is good. So I ended up, we each ended up owning certain characters and trying to make sure that their point of view was put on the page. That's one of the beauties of having more than one author. And there's Hannah's antagonist is the professor. He's a white, middle-aged, narcissistic, manipulative sort of jerk, and I could relate to that pretty well. So I sort of championed the prof, but he's a smart guy, and I like smart guys. So
dislike the prof.
At the end, when I finished with him, Andon totally disliked the prof, and of course he has a redeeming moment.
But I never disliked the prof. I mean, I've worked with older white male narcissists, and they're not all bad. I mean, they're complicated and they're okay. But the manager was the one that kind of... But there's also Nash Sharma, who's the director of acute psychiatry, and I think some particularly lived experience people had a bit of a problem with him. But I have a definite soft spot for him, and he's very reasoned. He's very passionate about his work and his patients, but he has a he wants evidence. He wants evidence-based, and there's a lot of good argument for that. And he and Elena, the psychologist, kind of have a bit of a conflict, and Hannah in the middle is kind of, oh, jeepers.
Well, he represents the physical, the drug therapies, the MRIs for diagnosis and so forth. Give them find this spot that lights up in the brain, give them this drug, and Elena represents, and the prof represent the talking therapies, the things that, and each of which, and we discovered people associate with psychiatry. Some people say, oh, I thought psychiatry was all about drugs. Other people say, I thought psychiatry was all about lying on the couch talking about your mother. And others say, I thought psychiatry was about being locked up forever. And of course, none of those are strictly true.
It's a blend. And with the, I also liked the fact that obviously you had your different characters, different specialities, different strengths, but then you had the, I'm forgetting, episodic with your different patients, and you had those strengths apply to the different cases. Was there one that were they all sort of the same difficulty to write? Was there ones that were easier and just flowed together faster?
Let me take part one and do part two, which is the easy or hard stuff, so you've got some time to think about that. The episodic structure was our solution in the end to wanting to look at the mental health workers, but also wanting to take a deep dive into the cases. And you did not want to have like 12 cases running all through the book. I mean, imagine reading a book with 12 strands going all the way through. You need to keep case notes yourself. You go nuts.
pardon the expression. But so we settled on a structure for the book, which was which will be familiar to everybody in this room. It's the structure of a TV season. It's a structure that's been used for every medical drama since Dr. Finlay's casebook, and obviously for House and for Grey's Anatomy and so on. You have a patient of the week, if you like, but you have ongoing characters, including patients, who roll through, but just enough that we can keep track of. And we took that approach, but it's not a typical approach to a novel. And that was one of the two things that frightened publishers. One was the mental health space. The other was that we had a non-standard novel structure, that we were using an episodic structure. And if you're going to be, innovative or radical, do it in one dimension only, because if you do it in two, you'll really start to scare the horses. So, and we really scared the horses with that. But it was the way to tell a stories that made us, could take us deep into the cases, and at the same time, at the end of a chapter, okay, we don't need to worry about those characters anymore. They've moved on. Let's look at something else. But at the same time, also have the longer arcs of major patients and the clinicians. And which ones were the easiest and hardest to write, do you think? And Buist.
So our middle chapter is sort of slightly different. So the middle chapter in this book is she's on call. So you just get one night with her on call. And that night she gets the Keane family. And the Keane family are families as a clinician. Every time I'm on call, I'm familiar with. And they're the ones that the service know well. And at Christmas time, one of them always...
Frequent flyers.
They always end up, which kind of really means we're not managing them well enough. I mean, if you they're not getting the support they need. But these are not the ones with psychosis or they're ones that are just difficult. And so they were difficult to write, and I don't even know that we did them well enough to make them sympathetic enough. But we're going to try that in the next sequel, because we follow the Keane family throughout the next novel. So they were difficult.
People would read it and say, what a bunch of loser bogans, And seriously, and she's always having suicide attempts, and she's going through men like there's no tomorrow, and so on. And I think in book one, there's an inclination to feel that way about them, and there are no evil people in our books, and we felt an obligation in book two to dig deep and say, what's going on for these people? How tough is it?
We hope we've done that, or will have done that before it's published. But the character that was hardest was Chloe. So Chloe is one of the characters that follows throughout. She has very severe anorexia nervosa. So basically, Nash does not want to admit her. She's dying. There's nothing we can do for her, says Nash.
No pill.
There is no pill. And certainly, therefore, an inpatient admission. She's already had multiple, I've forgotten the number we gave her.
17.
Okay. Inpatient admissions. And therefore... she doesn't want to be here. Her parents don't want her in here. Please don't have her in here. So I have never been an eating disorder specialist, but for many years I covered an eating disorder unit when my boss was away. So I certainly had it, and that family therapy session, as I said, I did with the family. But it was a very different family, and ultimately the family were ready to hear the noise, and the father was nothing like David Young, and there were no vanilla slices, though they were mentioned. But but the problem was Graeme read it and said she's kind of dehumanised, I think was the word you used. I went, ooh, and there were two things that I realised. One was, I actually don't like treating people with eating disorders. And I realise this is kind of embarrassing, and it's why I don't do it, is they don't do what I tell them to do. Yeah, that's right.
Their goal is different.
Yeah, their goal is different, and it's just didn't suit me. And I recognise that, which is why I generally didn't look after people with eating disorders. And while I was, of course, I went into that space and I did it to my best of my ability. But in general, I don't, because I don't do what I tell them to do.
Okay, so let me just put something in here, because Anne wrote from a lot of clinical experience, and in the end we put it on the page. The nurse sort of says, we don't like these. These people, they annoy us, and they figure out, if you like, that this is because they've got different goals and so on. But my former partner was an anorexia nervosa survivor, and obviously this was someone I loved, and you look at it very differently when it's someone very close to you, and her recovery was prompted by virtually exactly the same treatment that is described in the book. So even though Anne had seen it in practice as a clinician, my former partner related it to me, and she was a clinician herself, so she had some insight into what was going on later on in retrospect, and just said, this is what got her through. This is what stopped her trying to kill herself. Or stopped her from killing herself. I put that very badly. But stopped her from dying.
But the other thing that I kept there, which I realised, which felt dehumanising, but we still had to keep there, is when you've got severe anorexia and you've had a body mass index of below 15 for more than 2 years, all the research shows, and my clinical experience is, you're cognitively impaired. And so you kind of have this different interaction, and we still needed to put that on the page. So she's still not quite. There is still something different about Chloe, and that's what it is. It's
just because she's cognitively impaired doesn't mean she shouldn't be a sympathetic character.
Oh, absolutely not.
And this is really, it's really fundamental. And look, part of this is for example, there are a couple of moments in the book where Hannah is unsympathetic to the patients, where she says stuff that you say in the kitchen, basically. We wouldn't say in public, but when you're with your colleagues and they say, "Gee, she pisses me off," whatever. And we put that on the page because it's real. And we've had a couple of people with lived experience who said, "I would never want to work with someone like Hannah because of that." And you say, well, sorry, we put it on the page because it's what goes on behind the scenes. And most of us know that what we say behind the scenes is different from what we say in public. And I used to work as a consultant. We used to talk about the kitchen and the living room. We used to say in the kitchen, we can say everything we like about our clients. In the living room, we have a job to do.
But I think we also show almost immediately in the 2 cases where it happens is one of the other clinicians takes her up and says, "Oh, hold on, whoa, do you want to be her?" Whatever. And I think that's really important. And Hannah reflects on that and learns. And that's, to me, part of the process of being human. And I would like to think most readers will forgive Hannah.
Well, most readers who work in a job where you have to deal with people who are difficult will know that sometimes you need to debrief with people, whether it be your spouse, whether it be your other co-workers, and say, "Oh man, they're driving me nuts," but it doesn't mean that you behave in that way out there. Just in terms of Hannah's behaviour there, I want to tell a story because it's about if you are authentic enough in what you write, you find that people come up to you and say, "You know what, that something uncannily like that happened in my life," and it can be a bit freaky at times. We've had a bunch of these, but I just want to tell you one because it's sort of relevant to Hannah's sort of misjudgment or whatever. At one of our very early talks in Traralgon, Victoria on this tour, we had an opening speaker by the name of Abbas Maran. And something we do sometimes is have an opening speaker who's an emerging author, early writer, so they have a chance to have a bigger audience than they might normally have and get that feel and time. And Abbas was an older Iranian man who was attempting to complete the work of his daughter. His daughter was Marsha Maran, who wrote a book called Pomegranate Soup, a very successful book. But as Abbas described it, as a father, Abbas described it, after a battle with writer's block, she eventually lost her life. And he was trying to pick up and carry on this work. And chapter 5 of The Glass House is about an Iranian woman who's battling writer's block. And she comes in, and we had no idea of the story. She comes in, and Hannah, who is dealing with people with end-stage and life-threatening anorexia nervosa, with schizophrenia that can destroy their lives, with major depression that might lead to suicide, she thinks, writer's block, give me a break, and then is pulled up and realises this is the early intervention that we need to do to stop it turning into something which we have to deal with in the acute psychiatry unit as a suicide attempt or whatever.
And it gives I think, as Hannah or the other professionals are having those opportunities, moments for reflection, I think it also gives the reader a moment to reflect as well, because a lot of the topics that you write about, the things that maybe people don't have lived experience with, or they don't work in those professions, so they haven't encountered maybe those exact scenarios. I certainly found that for myself, there were times when I was frustrated with Chloe. It was something that I hadn't had a lot of experience with, and there were moments when I was sort of frustrated because you were seeing, maybe the impact on the family or things like that. And so I really appreciated those moments where there was that pause for reflection of you wouldn't want to be in that scenario as well.
Look, anybody reading this book and says, oh, that patient's behaving really stupidly, if you've ever tried to lose weight and you've eaten a chocolate bar when you shouldn't have, you've behaved stupidly too. We all have. And one of the things that people lose sight of with mental health is the idea that there's this sort of idea that once you've got mental health issues, you've got them for good, you're stuffed. Whereas it can be very episodic. People can have long periods of being very well and then periods when they're not, and that would apply to cancer, if you like. You get diagnosed with cancer, they might say, easy one, we do a quick operation, you'll be fine. Or it might be, you're gone in a few months. Or it might be, you're going to have to come back, we'll do our best, we'll monitor it, we'll see what happens, we'll see where it goes. And mental health is like that.
And with Hannah's background as well, and the way that sort of she had to dig down inside herself and figure out what was going on, what was she passing on, with her treatment of patients. I thought you handled that very well as well. And with that sort of encouragement for her to seek her own therapy, is that something that is that common when you work in the mental health fields?
These days, much less. Unfortunately, when I trained, much more. But that's kind of part of what we're exploring in this book is this battle for the soul of psychiatry, of the biological here and the psychological here.
Yeah, why would you need to have therapy if what your job is to spot which part of the brain lights up on the MRI and prescribe the drug? What's the problem?
Yeah.
Why would you get therapy?
I think if we're going to be psychiatrists in the way that I would like us to be psychiatrists, it's more complex, and we need that broader kind of take of things. And look, I have some registrars that kind of are tossing that up, and some registrars that need it, and we tell them they need it. They may or may not take that up, but the registrars are under enormous pressure. Unlike when I trained, you basically did one exam at the end, and you were under an incredible pressure at the end. It was all like you turned up, it was a 2-day exam, you turned up at 8 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock at night, and you got an envelope which told you whether you could go to day 2. And, I was lucky enough to get through the whole thing. I don't know quite how I did that, but anyway, I did, having had it written. So you did a written exam and then you did these 2 orals. And I was everyone tended to fail day 1, which was the psychiatry oral. And I thought, why would you fail that? This is what I'm doing every day. This is my life. This is what I do. And day 2 terrified me. It was the medical part of it. And I had to actually examine a patient and touch them and listen to their heart. And I'll never forget it. Listen to the heart and I'm going, oh my God, you've got an aortic valve kind of problem, which I had never heard in my entire medical career. And it was like, wow. But anyway.
Let me draw your attention to the fact that you're answering a question about patients taking their own therapy.
Yeah. So, but it was... It was the pressure on you was so different because I had 4 years of just soaking in psychiatry in my patients, whereas now the registrars have something they have to have done every 6 months, and they're just under so much pressure that their own therapy and even reflecting is they just don't have the time, which I think is incredibly unfortunate. But there are a few that will go on, but not many, unfortunately.
So in terms of the mental health discourse and what's available, do you think that it's moving in the right direction with your experience with talking to so many people about it, with their lived experience and your experience as a professional in that field? Do you think we're moving towards a place where you're going to hear more examples of there being preventative, or sorry, I forget the other term, but early intervention?
Yeah, I'll take this question.
No. The pendulum keeps swinging, and I just don't think, because politics gets involved, it just goes skewed. So look, this is a state-based thing, so I don't know. I know everywhere in Australia is under-resourced and not doing well. But Victoria has had a Royal Commission, and now we're currently, which is kind of reflected a bit in this book, that the Nicole's come in and kind of pushing certain things. And I'm old enough to have trained in the old system where we had over-sedated patients in wards for years, and that was not good. But now in Victoria, or at least in pretty much Australia-wide, there is not enough community support, and people are on the street and not able to get supports and not able to get mental health treatment, and that's no good either. And there's a push further towards that in Victoria. So anti-restraints, anything about community treatment orders or anything that's imposing something. And I have, through this book, I've had feedback from lived experience people which have really pulled me up to really go, okay. So the community treatment order, which I see as part of which I don't do very often because of where I work, but which I see as kind of helping people get the treatment they need.
Making people get the treatment they need.
Yeah, and she says is a total robbing of dignity. And I went, whoa, okay. And we explore that more in the sequel. We have a long-term patient who leaves the long-term ward but's fighting the community treatment order. And so I get that, but on the other hand, we also in this book have Luca, who has schizophrenia and uses ice, which is the other huge change that's happened in the last 30 years, is ice has just changed the whole face of what our emergency departments look like. It's full of really dangerous people, and our nursing staff are getting huge, and it's nursing staff, not medical staff, that are having huge injury rates because of ice. And what do we do with that? And if we're not shackling them or treating them with sedatives, then they're going to be in prison. And I don't think that's the answer either. So I don't know what the answer is, but we haven't got it.
So you've got book 2 coming. And I know that there was going to be a series. Is it going to be a duology, or is there going to be more, or to be seen, to be decided?
It's up to you.
Keep putting your money where your mouth is.
Absolutely. Look, if the books are successful, it's structured like a TV season. And you know how TV seasons work? They say, it worked. We'll have another season. Yeah, that was good too. We'll have another season. And we can do 8 before Hannah qualifies. And then we can keep going. So yeah, and we are not out of ideas. There's just so much you can explore in this world. Hannah is a trainee, so she started in the acute psychiatry area. In the next book, she's in the community sort of outpatient outreach clinic. In the next book, she could be in forensic psychiatry. She could be in child psychiatry. She could be in an Indigenous psychiatry role. There are so many places we can go, so many stories that we can tell. But at the end of the day, it'll be a commercial decision that'll be made by the publisher, which is there enough interest? I've got to say, so far, so good, and it's all down to the independent booksellers. The leading edge independent booksellers
bestseller list. We are currently number 2. We were number 1 a couple of weeks ago, so we're holding up there. And that is absolutely down to bookshops like Paperbark.
And readers like you.
All right.
And customers of bookshops like
Yes,
Paperbark.
yeah. So the next 2 from me is, if possible, we love hearing from you guys. We love hearing you read a section of the novel, if that's at all possible. I had it in my very first email months and months ago, so I don't know whether you had a section in particular that you enjoy.
I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
I mean, because I know how many people here have read it already? Okay. Well, look, that's good. Yeah, but okay, but you've heard it before. But we'll do it anyway. But look, pass
so
it
is
out.
that all you want to do?
And then we will do audience questions.
Okay.
Sounds great.
Excellent.
So,
Grab a copy that doesn't have my scribble on it. I just realised that.
No. We will be able to manage the scribble, I'm sure.
we had a big fight one night because I was given an advance reader copy, which is like an unedited proof. And I'm not going to read from this. It's all changed. And hadn't changed much. Looks like an IAS here. Okay.
There's one over there if you want.
Give me a real one. Sure. Just to be sure. This looks a bit weird. Oh, here we go.
I do only do the finished copies.
It looked like a finished copy, actually. Somebody ripped out that early paint. Brace yourselves. It's an unremarkable Victorian terrace in an inner suburb of Melbourne. Only the closed curtains on a summer morning suggest that anything is amiss. Behind them, the open living space is in disarray. Household items are scattered on the floor, cooking pots, cleaning products, a baby's rattle. But there has been method in their placement. Below the sink, 3 rows of tinned food mark the start of a trail that runs to the front door. Literal stumbling blocks for an intruder who wanted to take the shortest route to the kitchen bench. A woman, small, dark-haired and visibly agitated, enters from the back garden in her dressing gown, carrying a pot plant. She deposits it in the hallway outside the nursery, then fetches a stool from the kitchen. She climbs up with a plant and balances it on top of the door. A laugh, unnatural, fractured, escapes her. It's partly the image of the booby trap going off, partly a perverse satisfaction that they've chosen the wrong woman to mess with, and perhaps the only way her mind can deal with what she has to do next. Back in the kitchen, the baby carrier is sitting on the bench. Matilda was crying all night, and now she's crying again. Sian pulls a kitchen knife from the block.
Ooh, chills. Yes, please.
I think you might need some sort of resolution to that. And let us just say that no babies were harmed in the making of this book. And Anne will now switch, because every chapter begins with a little vignette like that puts us in the patient's world. And then it switches, as a TV episode might, into Hannah Wright's point of view. So now Anne will read Hannah.
If I'd wanted an image to sum up everything that's disturbed me in my first 3 weeks of acute psychiatry at Menzies Hospital, and, in a strange way, what I've loved about it, I have it now. A slight woman in a Tweety Bird nightie, an untied blue satin dressing gown, is walking down the white hallway of the Mental Health Services Acute Unit, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers. Powerless, vulnerable, and probably with no idea why she's here. Acute psychiatry is the emergency medicine of mental health, for the stuff nobody saw coming, until someone close to them becomes paranoid or overdoses or begins cutting themselves. Or waving a knife around, as Shantini, the woman being brought into the ward, did a few hours ago. Today may be the lowest point of her life. In the next hours and days, we'll have a chance to do something about it, to work out what disease or situation is behind the crisis, to treat it and to find a path forward. The cops, a tall male and a wide female swaggering to accommodate the equipment on their belts, look relaxed, smiling, chatting, but they're not touching her. Seems wise. I'm reading in her body language the irritability that sometimes accompanies psychosis. Don't poke the bear, guys. The crisis assessment and treatment team briefed me over the phone. No previous psychiatric episodes, meaning only that she's not in our system, not that she's never had one. Not coherent. Her name was provided by the neighbour, who'd seen her behaving oddly in the street and called the police. But the police called the cat guys. When she pulled a knife on them, they called the police again. The police took her to the emergency department, who then sent her on to us. And it's still only 11 a.m.
Thank you so much, Anne and Graeme.
You, like many people who ask questions at these, raise these sort of much broader questions of the community as a whole, of our society, of what we call mental health and so on, and how it sits in a bigger context. And the short answer is we didn't explore that in detail. We've touched on it in the Glass House, but it's something that as the books develop, would love to look further into, because they're big issues. Well, it's a start. I think it's a start to say as an ex-management consultant, I'd say if you want to get angry, then one side of the story will do. But if you actually want to find solutions, you need to hear where everybody's coming from.
But I think the other thing that we did was that there's a variety of solutions to the patient's stories, and they're not all happy. And they're not all definite. That there was some grey, and the uncertainty, and in a sense we take that on in the next book. So Chloe's younger sister, who we see in the family therapy sessions, turns up as a patient in the next book, because she's going to be affected by this, and that's kind of part of all of our experiences, and we all react in different ways to what we're exposed to, and that's normal. And it's being a bit accommodating of that, and the more we can be, I think we'll be much better society. But the politics keeps coming in, because it ends up with money and where it's going, and that's a big problem.
Okay, let me just tell one last story, okay, before we do questions and so on. When the Rosie Project, because you mentioned the Rosie, when it first came out, my very first event was 10 people at 3 p.m. in a library in a country town. They were all ladies of a certain age, drinking tea and eating biscuits and so on in the library. And there was a bookseller there, independent bookseller. And I said, "Sell a few books today, my friend." And he looked at me like I had no idea whatsoever, which was correct. And so I did my bit of shtick, and I read the bit of from the Rosie Project, and I said, "And if you want to know what happens next, well, you'll have to support your local bookseller." And the librarian got up and she said, "No need to do that. We've got copies in the library." And I realised at that moment how tough it was for independent booksellers. And what I actually said to those ladies was, "You know what, you might want to get it from the library, times are tough and so on, but Christmas is coming, and you know what it's like. You think, what am I going to get for that person, blah, 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 my second cousin's niece or whatever." You think, at that moment, you'll be so glad you bought that stack of signed copies of the Rosie Project. And let me tell you, we sold 3 copies, okay? We sold 3, but let me tell you, those 3 people bought valuable first printings of the Rosie Project, so there.
Thank you. Very true. It is. We love our libraries. Our local library is fantastic, and they buy their library stock through us. So we are very lucky that we've got such a great library. But you are very right. Sometimes it is tough. Thank you so much to everyone for coming. Thank you so much to Anne and Graeme, and we wish you the best of luck and no mechanical issues for the rest of your trip.
They can buy books from you, can't they, now?
And you can. So I do have some books up here. So I have the Glass House here. I have a couple copies of the Rosie Project, and I also do have our next book club pick, which is in a fortnight. So that is at the end of the month. So I have those here. You're all here, so you're all book club members, and that means that you do get 20% off of our book of the months. So come and see me. Otherwise, sorry.
So I've got something else to say. We forgot to mention this. Books sold at the event. The Glass House sold at the event. Our royalties go to mental health charity.
And all the proceeds from the tickets that you bought tonight will also go towards RUA, which was the WA mental health charity that you chose. Yes, so thank you so much, everyone who has come along. We will turn the lights back up and, mingle.
Thank you. Well done.